I love the feeling of finding an old book that I wasn't looking for and that I end up loving. And that doesn't happen that often. In fact, it hasn't happened for a long time. This book is called Wild, and it's by Cheryl Strayed, and it is not in the fantasy genre, which is what I normally read and talk about on this channel, but it has a couple of the things that I often really love in a fantasy story, or in any story that I read, which is an emotional journey and a physical journey, and those are happening at the same time. I am going to partially review it, but also partially just talk about the things that I loved about it. So I'm not going to make a huge effort to be spoiler-free, and it's not really a book that's about the plot of the story anyway, so I don't think spoilers really matter as much for this kind of book. Journey before destination. So it's not actually that old. The copyright date is 2012, so it's over 10 years old now, but it takes place in the mid-90s. Cheryl Strayed, the character, who is a real person, by the way, had been through a lot by the time she was 26 and made the decision to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. The Pacific Crest Trail is the physical journey that she goes on through this. And then the emotional journey is like partly the reasons she went on the hike in the first place, and then also partly like the things she learns and discovers about herself that she didn't plan on, which are just as much a part of her story as the things that she did plan on. So I took my kids to the park. There was a little free library. I looked inside. There was this spine that in gold letters just said the title, Wild. And that stood out to me. I thought, that seems interesting. I wonder what it's about. The dust jacket is long gone. I didn't look it up online or anything. I just took it out. The title page also says From Lost to Found on the Pacific Crest Trail. And then looking through, the author's note talks about how she utilized her journals that she kept on her journey, how she looked up people that she had met on her journey, gives a little map of the west coast of America where the Pacific Crest Trail goes through. And then I looked a little bit at the prologue, and that was enough for me to grab it and think, this sounds like a story that I want to read. It starts off really strong. She puts her personality as a writer into that first little bit. She pulls out one scene from her journey to just be like, here's what you're going to get here. And if you have seen the movie Wild with Reese Witherspoon, the beginning of the movie is the same scene that's in the prologue of the book, which is, she is so far into her hike now, there is no going back. When you're on a long distance hike like that, your shoes are a big deal. She had taken them off to rest her feet, and one of them goes careening down the ledge and is just lost forever. And she's just sitting there looking at it like, what now? And then, because what's the point of one shoe? Worthless by itself, she picks up the other one and hucks it after the first. And so that scene, just the fact that it happened and the way that she told it had me drawn into this, and I was like, I think I'm gonna like the way that she tells this story. But then once we go into chapter 1, it doesn't start with her journey on the trail. If you've seen the movie, which I watched last night, the book is better. The movie starts with her going on her trip. The book has that prologue of like, here's a scene she decided to pluck out and give us as an example. But then in going back to chapter 1, it goes far enough back in her life to introduce us to the things that she is dealing with and things that set her up to want to do this monumental, dangerous thing. And then, even then, once we go back a few years to like the big impetus that sets her off, we keep going back even farther into her life, clear back to her childhood, because those things, I feel like this book kind of came to me at just the right time. I've also been reading a nonfiction book that talks about how trauma gets imprinted into the body. And so having been reading that and then reading how she's going back in her mind into her childhood, I feel like gave me more depth to her story than if I hadn't been reading that other book. Just having more of an understanding of what she had been through, how it's affecting her, and how I could totally see that that would set her up to want to go hike for hundreds of miles alone. So she takes us through, she just kind of picks out the pieces that matter to this story, which is her hike on the trail. The biggest one being the loss of her mom. She had an abusive father, and her mom took a long time to be able to get away. And part of her childhood, growing up out in like the Wisconsin woods without modern conveniences, very like Little House on the Prairie style, how she went off to college and her mom took the opportunity to also go to college with her at the same time. They like made this agreement that maybe we'll greet each other and act like we know each other, but sometimes we just won't, so we can have our own separate lives. But the author, Cheryl, really puts an emphasis on how much her mom loved her and her siblings. The depth and the width of that mother's love for her had carried her through life. Her mom was a center point to her entire life. And then her mom gets diagnosed with cancer. So Cheryl is going through so much pain on her journey with her mom, with her husband, who becomes her ex-husband. I can't even remember what order we learn everything about her from. She kind of goes back and forth. The story format, we kind of go through her childhood and pain with her mom's cancer and death to start. Then we get to her hike. But then as she's hiking and going on her physical journey, she'll take us back to some other thing that happened in her life. So it's kind of like woven in and out. She'll hike for a while. The focus on the physical pain and deprivation doesn't really give her time to mull over the things and deal with the things that she wanted to, but it kind of happens anyway. And so she'll have this moment on the trail that takes her back. So then in the story, she'll take us back to something that happened before, and then we'll come forward in the story again to her trail hike again. I kind of appreciated that format because hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, which she chose to do alone, means that there wasn't a ton of interaction with other humans. So there's not a ton of dialogue, but between people she met on the trail and going back into things that happened before, it does give more a sense of stuff is still happening besides just her walking and her feet hurt. And the story is her physical and emotional journey. That's what it is. It's not about how it ends or what she's getting to. It's about following her as she goes. And this was really hard for me to put down because I felt like I was walking along on her journey with her. And I felt drawn in to the point that I wanted to know what happens next. How does she deal with what's going on? There are some really good humorous moments, like the fact that she was so inexperienced. This takes place in the mid-90s. So before you could just do internet searching to plan your PCT hike. So she was relying on a guidebook that she found, which also, I loved that moment because she was doing something completely different. She saw the guidebook in a bookstore, picked it up, had never heard of the Pacific Crest Trail before, put the guidebook down, went and did something else. A huge emotional stress that she was going through, and then came back and bought that book. So it was like, to me, I felt like this book came to me at the right time, and then in the book, that book came to her at the right time. I just loved how that happened. Where was I? Oh, so she's not experienced. She's not an experienced hiker. She's like, well, it's just walking and I know how to walk places. So she doesn't do things like packing up her bag and walking a few miles each day to build up her strength. She's not weighing every little thing. There's a funny scene where she's trying to put on her backpack for the first time and can't. And then everyone who meets her makes fun of her for how much weight she's carrying. And she sees someone else on the trail who's brushing their teeth who had cut off the handle of their toothbrush. And she was like, oh, he is so smart. He's leaving off weight everywhere he can. She never thought she would think so much about weight. And there's just so many little things. Like in her normal life, she was always so concerned with her size. Modern woman, how thin do I feel today? But then once she gets to the trail, does not matter. She is walking all day with this heavy pack on her, and she's eating trail food, which is so boring. She can't even cook the food she packed to cook at first because she took the wrong kind of gas for her stove, and so she's just eating like trail mix and granola and such boring stuff. And so many days spent burning so many calories, never adequately getting to refill them. All she can think about is food, and every time she gets to a place where she can get real food, that's like all she can think about. And the more hungry she is, the better the food tastes. And there was so much emphasis by her put on the food at each place. You have to know that back when she was doing her hike, she thought about food a lot, but in a completely different way than before that when she was not on the trail. Like, am I eating too much? On the trail, who cares? She is hungry, she wants to eat as much as she can and never feels like she can eat enough. Another thing that there was a lot of emphasis on in here, which totally, completely makes sense, and I don't feel like enough emphasis was put on it in the movie, which I'm not talking about the movie, I'm talking about the book, was her foot pain, her foot discomfort, losing toenails, and how much impact that had on her every day, every mile, every time she stopped. The shoes and the feet were a big deal. You spend all day on your feet. If your feet are having trouble, you are having trouble. Another thing that I really loved about this and about the journey she chose to take, she wanted to go alone. She had stuff in her life she needed to figure out, and she wanted to spend those days walking by herself to figure it out. But sometimes she met other people on the trail. I'm not sure she ever met anyone going the opposite way as her. It was all people who started in the south. Some people started farther behind her, clear back at the Mexican border. Some people started about where she started in Mojave, and then some people she would meet who were just doing like a day hike. So they'd drive up, have someone meet them farther up the trail, and they were just hiking for the day. But the Pacific Crest Trail has this trail register, so you can write your name, the date, you can write a little message. And so if you're going up the trail, you see someone's name who's about 2 days ahead of you, and you know they're there. You never see them, you never meet them. You will only meet them if you hike a little faster than them, or if they get to a place where they decide to stop and camp for a couple days to rest and you end up catching up to them. And there were humorous scenes where someone would come hiking up behind her and find her and go, "Hey, Cheryl! Hi, Cheryl!" She'd be like, "How do you know me?" And they're like, "Oh, we've been seeing your name on the trail register. We've been following you for days." And that feeling that she had, that she kind of describes, but you also just get the feeling of it by reading her story. The type of person who decides to hike the Pacific Crest Trail is going to have something in common with every person they meet on the trail. The person who decides to hike it is doing it for some reason. And they don't always talk about why. There's like this mutual understanding of, you have chosen to undertake this thing. I have also chosen to undertake this thing. This thing that we are doing is really, really hard. It's something that every time there is a place where they can stop and get off the trail and go back to their normal life, they have to make the decision again to keep going or to be done. And there were plenty of times where she wanted to be done. She wanted to quit. She wanted to just take a shower and sleep on a bed and have her feet stop hurting and eat real food, but she kept going. And it was really weird for me. I don't normally read this kind of book, which is a real person writing their own story, to read this and then go follow her on Instagram, be like, oh, there's this person who's been through this thing and look at her now. Just like that reality of, maybe it's because I usually read fantasy books and the characters are not real people, and this is actually a real person who really went through all this stuff. I don't know how much of it is fictionalized. I have a feeling not very much. The hike took her 3 months. She started not all the way down at Mexico, Southern California. She skipped a lot because it was completely socked in, which was a term she had never heard before, which meant it's just covered in too much snow to be able to hike on. She bypassed a whole bunch of that and ended in Northern Oregon. So it took 3 months. But this kind of just pulls out like the incidents that mattered. So she'll have hiked for days before something interesting happens. So if you take out only the interesting things, the times she met people, the times she took a break from the trail and went and did something, or the times where she's going back into her life to tell us things that happened to her before. It does not seem like a boring trip. There's always the danger of wild animals, meeting a man who's not safe on the trail. There's always the danger of running out of food, running out of water, overheating, and hypothermia, sometimes even on the same day, because of how steeply the elevation changes sometimes. It was also fun for me living in the Pacific Northwest to read a story that takes place near places that I've been to. I live in Oregon, so as she's hiking through California up into Oregon, the scenery that she's describing is getting more familiar to me. I've hiked places like that before. I feel like I've been rambling a lot. I didn't actually take notes. There is some adult content, the way that she had chose to handle some of her pain in her life before the hike, some of the stuff she does on her hike, some of the stuff that she is dealing with and thinking about. There is adult content there. I feel like it's really written for a female audience because there's so much that's so personal to her and what she went through, and a lot of it having to do with being a woman and a wife and a daughter and a woman alone on the trail. I'm not going to say that a man couldn't read it and enjoy it, but it is just as much about her emotional journey as her physical journey. So just keeping that in mind if you decide to try it out. It was like an Oprah Book Club book when it was newer. It's very highly rated on Amazon. I found all this stuff out afterwards because I didn't want to know too much going in. This book really drew me in. Some of the things that she was going through are similar things that I have felt like I needed to deal with in my own life. So that drew me into her story. I liked the way that she told her story. I appreciate how towards the beginning of the book, she talks about how she wants to be a writer. She wants to write stories. She wants to write a book. And she doesn't say this in here. This was a thought I was thinking about, which was she wanted to write a book, but didn't write a book until she went and did something big in her life. And then she was able to write a book about that. That's actually something that a lot of people who give writing advice give, is just as important as it is to learn the craft of writing. It's also important to do things that have nothing to do with reading or writing, just to fill your life with experiences, fill your life with meeting people, doing stuff, learning new things, and then that adds depth to whatever you do decide to write about. And I really loved reading about her journey on the Pacific Crest Trail. There was so much that her body went through, that her mind went through. It was really hard, and she did it. So I have rambled a lot. This is my 13-year-old read that I just found that is outside of my normal reading genre, but I loved it and I will recommend it. If you also like a story about a journey, either emotional or physical, or if you just like a well-written book and want to break out of your normal genre once in a while, I will link the book and the author. I'll also link my Instagram and my Patreon. Thank you, patrons, so much. I appreciate you guys. And happy reading. Bye.